Well, good evening. Didn't the Lord bless us with a nice day today? Let us pray for a moment. Our Lord Creator, we are gathered here this evening in gratitude and celebration for the heritage that you have been entrusted to us. May we be ever mindful stewards of this precious gift, remembering those who came before us, those who drove the nails into the wood, those who laid the brick, constructing a community built on trust in you, our Lord, and guiding us in the daily affairs of our life. May the remembrances generated tonight renew our appreciation of the richness of our past and contribute to our understanding of who we are and how we arrived at this place in a particular time today. So I ask of you your blessing as we gather tonight, and bless and guide the work of the Wachovia Historical Society, the Moravian Church, Old Salem Museums and Gardens, and the other guardians of our Moravian heritage in the months and years ahead, that our work today be a gift and a source of pride for the future generations. In our gathering tonight in unison said, Amen.
The most important part of a viable organization is its board, the leadership, and the accomplishments that they each make individually to make the whole better. You have a great board at WHS, and I just want to take a minute to introduce them and hope that you will take a moment to talk. Most of you already know these folks, but there may be some of you who do not. Hope you have a chance to meet them after the program. I'll ask each one of them to stand when I call your name, and just hold your applause until they are all introduced. First, we have Jim Snyder, and Jim Snyder's in the back. He has to leave to get ready for a medical procedure tomorrow, but Jim, if you will stand. Jim is our vice chairman or vice president. Victoria Remiskovsky is our secretary, and she's also chair of the membership committee and coordinator of the WHS Guild. And we'll hear from her in just a minute. Carl Kapp, who is our treasurer. David Bergstone could not be with us tonight. He has COVID. Chris Hartley, and I want to thank Chris and Johnny Pearson and his committee. Chris's committee, actually, he's chairman of the annual meeting committee for putting this great program together for us tonight. John Hauser. Dr. Ed Hill is recuperating from a hip replacement, so he is not with us tonight. Paul Canals. Paul has been a member of WHS for a good long while and has been the editor of the Wachovia Tract newsletter that you all get, and he's done a fantastic job with that. John Larson, who you met and gave our invocation. Michelle Leonard. Zach Ruth. Dr. Ricky Sides. I.B. Sutherland is actually at home tonight with a reaction to his COVID shot. So we're missing him. He's our immediate past president. And Rob Spall. So let's give all these folks a hand. We also have an advisory board. And on that advisory board are 5 people at the moment. Johanna Brown, who's curator of WHS Collection at Mesda, and she's on our collections committee. Peggy Dodson, who you met at the front table this evening. Fred Spock. Johnny Pearson, who helped us with the program tonight. And most recently appointed is Ulrika Whitehouse, and she's a retired professor from Wake Forest. So let's give them a hand. This year we have focused on strengthening our administrative portion of WHS with a new website, a new membership software that helps us stay in touch with you, the members. We opened a small one-room workroom / office on West 4th Street where we can meet as committees. We've got all our records together for the first time in a long, long time. And we hopefully can use this space to also do some podcasting in the future. This year we established a guild, which we'll hear from the chairman of that guild in just a moment, and that is a member outreach program. Phase 1 of the Adam Spock Historical Park project was completed. The archaeological study was done by New South and Associates in Greensboro, and the study was made possible with grants from the Richard J. Reynolds and Marie Reynolds Foundation, the Marion Covington Foundation, and a mini grant from the North Carolina Federation of Historical Societies. If you'll look in your red packet that you got tonight, and you probably won't be able to see it because it's kind of dark in here, but you will find an aerial rendering of the Adam Spock Park, and we're very excited about this particular phase coming up, which is phase 2. The park will have a nice green space where we will have a monument to Adam and Maria Spock. The park will be handicapped accessible with a parking area, sidewalks where older people who are in wheelchairs or who are unsteady on their feet can walk around and sit in park benches and enjoy the scenery. There'll be a walking trail through adjacent wooded areas down to the park and around the park ruins of the Adam Spock home place. As much as we would love to be thinking about rebuilding the Rock House, that's not possible right now. We're just wanting to have a memorial park that is a nice respite, a place to go and meditate or have fun and meet with folks. Phase 2 will involve getting quotations for the various elements of the park and then writing and submitting grants to the various foundations and entities so that we can complete the project. This will take some time, as you can well imagine, and we do hope that by probably no longer than mid-2024, we will have the project completed, if all goes well. And you can help us pray about that. Our hope for ongoing maintenance of the park is to be covered by the Adam Spock Fund that we have carried as an organization since 1927 when we received the property. You'll remember that Henry Wesley Foltz compiled the first book of the Descendants of Adam Spock, which was copyrighted in 1924. The proceeds of that sale of that book began the designated fund that we still have carried until the present day. We have about $40,000 in the fund, but we need to grow that fund if we're going to use the interest from the fund to continually maintain the park. And that's where we hope that some of our good members and the people who are interested and descendants of Adam Spock will help. We want to have a brick paver program, and as you leave tonight and go out, well, whichever door, I believe this is the only one that's open, there's a table where the books will be set up. We have a sample of one of the pavers where individuals and families can honor a loved one in a lasting way, and it will have the name of the person being memorialized or honored and the name of the giver on the paver. Those pavers will be put in the sidewalks that go around the monument, down to the monument, and around the park perimeter. So it will be there in perpetuity. Excuse me while I shuffle my papers. We'll be sending out more information about this particular part of the program in the weeks to come. We want to sort of turn our attention now to a special guest that we want to introduce for those who have not already met him. Terry Taylor has served for several years as the Chief Operating Officer of Old Salem Incorporated, and it's a distinct honor for me to introduce him as the newly elected President and CEO of Old Salem. And Terry, wherever you are, would you come up and say a few words?
Thank you, Michelle. Well, there's one thing, I can't see any of you, so this is good, I guess. It seems inappropriate to welcome you to Old Salem because a lot of you have been here a lot longer than I have, but I am thrilled to be here with you tonight and to welcome you to this beautiful room and to Old Salem. And I just want to sincerely thank you for all that your organization has done for Old Salem for so many years and continues to do. And I'm really excited about some of the projects that we have on the slate for the next coming year. I shared with some of your members this week that we received some substantial grant money this past week from the county of Forsyth for the ARPA grants, which is some of the COVID money that's been given to the local communities. And we're going to be able to invest, I think, around $100,000 of that money into the Salem Tavern, and we're real thrilled to be able to do that. So thank you. Also, I have very exciting news, and a thank you to John Larson, who is here with us tonight, for the help that he provided Old Salem in securing, I think it's about $731,000 that was voted last night at the City Council meeting for Old Salem as well, and that's to help us get our doors. That sounds like a lot of money, but that's going to help us get our doors back open. Like other businesses, we have suffered greatly by not being able to fill positions, hire appropriate staff, but we're working as diligently as we can towards that effort. I'm extremely excited to announce that we have 3 of our very important historic venues reopening tomorrow on a permanent basis, and that includes the Single Brothers House, which is one of our 2 National Historic Landmarks here in the district. Also, the Bloom House will be opening, where we demonstrate woodworking, and also the Doctor's House is reopening tomorrow. And we have others planned for the remainder of this year into 2023 as we're able to fill those positions and get those buildings back open. But that is our number one goal, is to get the organization back open to where it was pre-COVID levels, and hopefully that'll bring visitors back to the community and back to this wonderful place. So once again, thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this meeting tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. So I come to you on behalf of the nominating committee tonight, since I.B. Sutherland couldn't be with us tonight. That group includes I.B. Sutherland, Ricky Sides, Rob Spock, Peg Spock, and Peggy Dodson. So thank you to that committee for all of your great service. We're nominating the following slate for 2023: Ann Lantry, Dr. Jay Lester, and Ned Erickson to join the board. And our officers for 2023 would be as follows. That's President Michelle DeLapp, Vice President Jimmy Snyder, Victoria Remashofsky as our secretary, and Carl Kapp once again as our treasurer. And so that is the slate of nominations I'd like to present to this organization. May I have a move or to accept this nomination as presented? And a second. All right, thank you. And with that, I think we just need a vote. I think show of hands would do to accept this board as presented. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. So moved. And at this time, Victoria, if you'll come and share with us a little bit about the Guild.
Well, welcome all Wachovia Historical Society members and friends. It is so good to see you again after such a long time. We have been plotting, and what we came up with was a guild to give us all a chance to get to know each other better. The fellowship it presents is kind of represented in this little sheet that is in your folder. And if you take a look at that, we'll get an idea of what sort of things the Guild is coming up with to offer this fellowship among all of us members. The past events, we started in March with a wonderful event led by David Bergstone and John Hauser. They took a group up and down the upper level of Main Street and explained the 1950s restoration and in some cases reconstruction of Old Salem that really saved it from going the way of many other cities, just dilapidated, torn down, and replaced by the modern. It is a fascinating history, and those two did a wonderful job of presenting it. The second was also an outside event, and the outside events that our tours are called On Your Feet. This one was presented by the Mannings, who had worked on Salem's anniversary project. You heard a lot about the girls who walked from Pennsylvania all the way down to Bethabara. The honoring of that group that originally walked was a wonderful and sweet moment. I loved what the Mannings did for this. They had their group walk down to the cemetery, and they gave them all a little snippet on each girl's life who had walked originally from Pennsylvania to Bethabara, helped found Salem, and are buried in our graveyard, God's Acre. Each person participating read a little bit about the life of the girl and laid a rose on her graveyard. It was a lovely ceremony and a lovely way to attach our memories that Wachovia has to that of Salem, who cares very deeply, their academy and college both, about this organization and all that goes on in Old Salem. Some of the events we have are just large, and it is meant to sponsor an interest in things that are going on in the Wachovia tract. The Salem Art, both two at the Fine Arts Center and also uptown at the Arts Council. The alumni had some surprising, wonderful revelations of Salem art. We hit June, and of course COVID hit us with Jerome Bias being postponed. But that is another type of event. There's On Your Feet, there are big group events, and then these that are held in houses that are not on the tour, but the residents of Salem very happy to have you come to an event at their home. Jerome Bias is a home event, and it has been postponed until next month. It's sold out because it sold out way back in June. Other types of events like that, Betsy Overton did a beautiful job opening up her home here in Old Salem to tell us about the cultural and historical background that connects the Moravians way back in their early 1400s years all the way up to the founding of Salem. A wonderful event, Let's Do Bethania, was a walking tour followed by a terrific social in the old schoolhouse. All events are always followed by a social, so you get to know the people who are in Wachovia Historical Society. They share common interests and stories, and it's a wonderful thing to watch. If this sounds good to you, you are automatically a member of the Guild. If you are a member of Wachovia Historical Society, on the back side of your little page are the upcoming events. Please take a look at them and decide which ones. Just decide to come of all of them. They are very, very entertaining and meant to increase the fellowship between all of us as members. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you.
All right, thank you, Victoria, and all the great things going on with the Guild. So it's my honor tonight to introduce our guest speaker to you. Now, we're fortunate to have a speaker of Michael Hardy's caliber with us. Over the past 3 decades, he has written about people, places, and events which are frequently overlooked in the grand sweeping narratives. He's the author of 25 books. It's pretty impressive. His articles have appeared in numerous national magazines. He's been featured on television on the program Blood and Fury, America's Civil War, on the American Heroes Channel, on Civil War Talk Radio. In 2010, Michael was named the North Carolina Historian of the Year, and I dare say that's an honor we will see him receive again. 2018, his book, General Lee's Immortals, was received the James I. Robertson Literary Prize, a very distinguished award. He is a graduate of the University of Alabama, and since 1995 has called Western North Carolina home. Michael blogs regularly at Looking for the Confederate War. If you want to have a chance to check that out, always good material. Even hosts an entertaining online chat Sunday evenings, so on Facebook, if you're interested in picking that up. His latest book, which just came out this fall, is A History Lover's Guide to North Carolina. He has copies out in the lobby. I hope you'll visit with Michael afterwards and partake of that book and others he brought with him. Fascinating book that helps us understand the truth behind the nicknames of First in Freedom and First in Flight and First, Farthest, and Last. From the sands of the Outer Banks to the bustling cities of our own Piedmont to the Western Mountains, you'll get a tour of the state of North Carolina through those pages. So, Michael and I have been friends for a number of years. I've always been an admirer of his knowledge and his prolific writing and his speaking ability. You're in for a treat tonight as we hear him talk about In the Footsteps of Bishop Spangenberg. So please welcome Michael Hardy to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a privilege to be here in Winston-Salem this evening, talking about history and sharing history and learning and exploring and all of those great things. It has been a privilege over the past 27 years to travel all across North Carolina, from Murphy all the way to Fort Fisher there below Wilmington, the Outer Banks and other areas, researching, writing about, talking about, exploring, volunteering at historic sites, just talking about all of this fantastic history that we have here in the Old North State. And you are very familiar with some of the fantastic reference materials that are here, right here in this community, that the Moravians left. We who live in Western North Carolina don't always have that abundance of resources. And I live just on the other side of Grandfather Mountain. And yes, when I left this afternoon at 3 o'clock, it was 33 degrees and spitting snow. So it's great to be down here where it was 50 degrees. But we don't have that abundance of resources that you do, and that other places, not just here in this community, but in other places as well. Now, we do have some fascinating personalities, folks like Hernando de Soto, even though we can't quite agree upon the route that he took. We have Juan Pardo, another Spanish explorer. These are both mid-1500s. We've got the Bartrams, who left accounts as they're exploring the flora and the fauna of Western North Carolina. But so many of the people, those early settlers exploring the wilds that become Western North Carolina, don't leave many examples. I live in Avery County, little county, baby county. We were the last county formed in the state in 1911. There is one history of Avery County. It was published in 1964. It is 100 pages long. It has no notes and no index. I have spent the past 10 years working on improving that, but that's, when somebody walks into our local museum and wants a history of the county, that's what they're given. And we don't have those resources. Another example, Daniel Boone. I was talking to somebody earlier about Daniel Boone. He tramped all over the other side of the crest of the Blue Ridge Mountains, camping in a cabin or a lean-to that was owned by Benjamin Howard. It's where the town of Boone is today. I know y'all all know where Boone is because every one of you were up there this weekend, right? It sure seemed that way. Boone supposedly camped on Grandfather Mountain. He left a roan-colored horse to graze on Roan Mountain. He forded the North Toe River at Booneford. Boone Ford got pressed together there on the North Toe. But all of these accounts are just family stories. Daniel Boone really never wrote about the places that he was out hunting and fishing when he was in the high country of Western North Carolina. So I say all of that to get to this point. When we find a source that talks about Western North Carolina, we latch onto it. We try and milk it for all that it's worth. Such is the case with Bishop Spangenberg's 1752 visit to western North Carolina and the journal that he kept. Daniel Boone hanging out right there. Statue of Boone right there in downtown Boone on the campus of Appalachian State. Bishop August Spangenberg is undoubtedly someone very familiar to most of you. He was born in Clintonburg, Germany in 1704. He studied at the University of Jena. He was a student of Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. He was concentrated bishop in 1744 and became one of the church fathers of the Moravian Church. He wrote a biography of Zinzendorf. He wrote a volume of systematic theology. He wrote a manual, for a lack of a better word, on mission work. One author writing in the Biographical Dictionary of Christian Missions believed that Spangenberg that his, quote, missiological views and practical leadership defined Moravian mission work until the mid-19th century. Of course, by my introduction this evening, you have probably deduced that we're not here to talk theology, but about that trip and that journal. Using that journal, we can retrace his steps through North Carolina history and geography, although sometimes we need to speculate about exactly where he was when he was writing. Brother Joseph, as Chester Davis referred to Spangenberg, 1973 History of the Moravians, visited North Carolina at least 4 times, or visited North America, at least 4 times. In the Christian world that I grew up in, we would call Spangenberg a church planter, because that's what he did. He was in Georgia in 1735, and then Pennsylvania, and then traveled to North Carolina in 1752. He was here in the colony of North Carolina to begin a new work, a new community, a new church. There were 6 men with him when they left Bethlehem, Pennsylvania on August 25th, 1752, traveling to Philadelphia and then down the eastern shore to Maryland and then into Virginia at Norfolk. They finally arrived in Edenton, North Carolina on September 9th and remained 10 days. Purchasing equipment and gathering supplies and learning about North Carolina. To back up for a moment, let's dive a little deeper into early history, early North Carolina history. The British Crown, King Charles II at the time, had granted charters in the New World to 8 Englishmen in 1663 and 1665. Their jobs were to establish civil structures, collect taxes, maintain orders, encourage people to move here. They didn't do a good job. Part of the failure was that they were absentee landowners for the most part. They didn't come to the colony to lead by example. Part of it has to do with Native Americans and the clashes going on because, the land, even though a lot of times Native American property ownership is different than what we think it was their land. They already lived here. Part of that had to do with pirates. Anytime you can mention pirates in a talk, that's great. Pirates roaming up and down the eastern coast from the Bahamas all the way up Virginia and eventually up into the New England area. In 1729, King George II made cash payments to all but one of these absentee landowners that ended their or their heirs' roles as landowners here in North Carolina. Only one heir, the heir of George Carteret, Earl Granville, refused to sell, and eventually he was granted a tract of land all across North Carolina. Well, we'll get there. He was granted a tract of land all across North Carolina that we call the Granville Tract. John Carteret, then current Earl of Granville, offered to sell up to 100,000 acres to the Moravians. Hence, Spangenberg's quest to explore and find a tract of land suitable for a new mission. While Edenton was no longer the capital of the colony of North Carolina when Spangenberg arrived, it was still an important port town, the second largest port town in the colony at that time. It had an abundance of lumber and tar and pitch that made Edenton an important site for those shipping vessels running up and down the coast and heading from the Bahamas and eventually to Great Britain and Europe. Spangenberg, in that very first entry in his diary, when he gets to the colony of North Carolina, makes no mention of Edenton, the town. He's writing September 13th, 1752. Even though in this image you can see the Episcopal Church, St. Paul's there in Edenton, part of that building probably existed. We're pretty sure that part of that building existed when Spangenberg arrived. Instead, he is writing about the mission field and the Native Americans that he's encountering. He wrote, quote, "The condition of the Indians in North Carolina is rather a deplorable one. The tribe of Chowans is reduced to a few families. Their land has been taken away from them. The Tuscaroras live about 35 miles from here and are still in possession of a fine tract of land. They are a remnant of that tribe that waged war with North Carolina and then took refuge with the Five Nations and became incorporated with them. Those that have remained here are treated with great contempt and will probably soon be entirely exterminated. The Meherrin Indians live further to the west and are also reduced to a mere handful. It would seem that a curse were resting upon them and oppressing them. Still further to the west are the Catawbans. They have been at war with the Five Nations. Beyond South Carolina, far to the southwest, are the Cherokee, a strong tribe. They keep up connections with South Carolina and make annual journeys thither to get their presents." Spangenberg does make mention of Edenton in his next entry. By September 25th, he and his company were in Granville County, writing about Edenton, which is in Chowan County. He tells us that, quote, "Edenton is one of the oldest towns in America, and yet it is hardly 1/4 as large as Germantown, although it has a beautiful situation. In Edenton, I saw one blacksmith, one shoemaker, and one tailor. If there are any more, I did not see them." He continues talking about the area. They didn't have any real navigatable streams, and there were few ways to ship products to markets. Tobacco, cattle, and hogs were moved to Virginia, where North Carolina farmers only received money for the meat. The butchers got the money for the hide and the tallow. Spangenberg's company had moved 150 miles from Eden to Granville. He remarked that, quote, there are other cities mentioned in the law books, but no houses, no people. They are only created by an act of the assembly." Writing the next day, Spangenberg lamented that so far he had found no available land. He wrote, "We have passed through several counties in North Carolina, Chowan, Bertie, Northampton, Edgecombe, and Granville, as far as Mr. Silas, 153 miles from Edenton. Our way lies through Orange and Anson, which is the last county toward the west. The land we have seen has nothing remarkable, but yet, as we are told, has all been taken up, if at all available. We sometimes travel 2 or 3 hours without finding anything but pine barrens, or stretches of white sand covered with pine. These districts are all taken up, I am informed, and the people make tar, pitch, and turpentine. If only these products could be conveyed to some stream and carried away by means of small craft to some port. We saw some few stretches of country that produce some oaks and other trees, with some tolerable farms. Though you expect the culture of Indian corn and raising hogs, there is but little done on these plantations. As far as cattle and stock are concerned, It is truly their care to see how they get through the winter. With horses, it is no better. If they survive it. Hay they have none, for there are no meadows, and corn fodder and tops do not go far. Thus in the winter the people have no milk at all, and when spring comes the cows are so nearly starved as to be of little benefit till harvest. This may be the reason that their horses are not much bigger or larger than English colts, and their cows are the size of yearlings. He goes on to complain that several of his party are sick. They believe they had picked up a fever while they were in Edenton. He doesn't make another entry in his journal for a month. And I wonder what's going on. What is he encountering? Obviously, if it's just barren land, he's probably not going to make an entry that day, because it's just like, okay, we saw this yesterday and the day before and the day before. But still, the historian, the researcher inside of me, I want that little tidbit of information. But it's a month before he makes his next entry. It's October 28th, 1752, and they are on the Catawba River. Considering the Catawba River is 220 miles long with its headwaters in present-day McDowell County, what he writes about being on the Catawba River is not all that helpful in trying to pinpoint the location where he is at. And I know there is a website out there that has some pinpoints of certain places, but it's a guess as to where this group really was at this point in time. He mentions Anson County in the entry, but Anson County is everything west, all the way to the Mississippi River. Spangenberg writes here that, quote, "Here I must remark of some of the difficulties incidental to colonizing of this country. They will probably settle in Anson County, but where? That's the question we're answering." He picks up his journal writing from forks of the Little River, Southside Brushy Mountains, in camp, November 5th, 1752. Did you know that there are 10 streams in North Carolina named Little River? And were probably other places called Little River that got a better name for some local family or some local event later on in the future. But he writes, November 5th, 1752, "I would suggest to the brethren that when they come to possess the land, it may be of great advantage to avail themselves of the services of the hunters whom we have to assist us to find the different bodies and tracts of land that which we take up. Their names are Henry Day, who lives in Granville County, near Mr. John Salas; John Perkins, who lives on the Catawba River and is known to Andrew Lambert, a well-known Scotchman; and John Roan, who lives about 20 miles from Captain Sennett on the Yadkin Road. I mention these items because no one about here knows anything about our lands nor their boundaries. I especially recommend John Perkins as a diligent and trustworthy man and a friend to the brethren." It's interesting that Spangenberg gave such high praise to local hunters. Now, it's not clear if these men were long hunters who would go into the wilderness for 6 months or 8 months and take a lot of game, deer, beaver, for sale in the markets, or for sale to overseas markets, or if these men were what we call market hunters. They would go maybe for a week and bring back game for their families or other members of their community. Henry Day actually owned a piece of property on the Tar River that contained, quote, "a beaver house," which I assume was probably a storage house or a place to barter for beaver skins. John Rhodes, we don't know a whole lot about, but John Perkins pops up in other histories. Judge A.C. Avery called him Gentleman John, and the Johns River in Caldwell County is named for him. There's actually a biography on Gentleman or of Gentleman John written by W.W. Scott and published in 1920. The Brushy Mountains, that's not all that helpful either. Brushy Mountains can be found in Buncombe County, Haywood, Jackson Polk, and Transylvania. All have brushy mountains. However, since he mentions his recommended guides, one of which is buried in present-day Caldwell County, we're going to say that he was south of the Brushy Mountains in present-day Wilkes County, or in Alexander County. There is a community today in Alexander County called the Little River Community. Spangenberg spent a great deal of time writing about the land he was surveying. 1,000 acres, part of it lowland, rich bottomland, springs, stones in abundance for building purposes, a site for a good mill. He also complains, if you've ever read the account, of the surveyors that are with him. The surveyor believed that each tract had to be square, had to have matching sides, and would only look at tracts of at least 1,000 acres. 5,000 was preferable. His next entry is dated November 12th, 1752. In a camp on the Catawba River at a place that he says might as well be called Indian Pass. He makes mention of Jonathan Weiss, a hunter who lived 20 miles from their camp on the Catawba River. Indian Pass, that doesn't really help us identify this spot either. I mean, there are literally scores of Native American paths or passes all over our state. The Catawba Trail runs through Asheville. The old Cherokee path to Virginia, that's where I live, we call Bright's Trace, or the old Yellow Mountain Road. It runs through Burke County and into Avery County and on over into Tennessee. There is the Sahara-Saponi Trail, the New River and Southern Trail, the Catawba and Northern Trail. These are just the major trails. There are plenty of little routes all across the land. So that, might as well call it Indian Pass, doesn't really help us identify that spot. 5 days later, Spangenberg gives us a solid clue to his location. He writes that his camp is on a tributary that flows in the Catawba near Quaker Meadows, not far from what he calls Table Mountain. Joseph McDowell received a land grant for this piece of property in 1749 and named the property after his home in Frederick County, Virginia. The current house was constructed in 1612 by Captain Charles McDowell, Jr. While this is an older picture of Quaker Meadows, it is occasionally open to the public. The 1812 house survives. This area was also a stop on the path of the Over Mountain men on their way to fight the Loyalists under Patrick Ferguson in September of 1780. They took one of those trails that I mentioned earlier, Bright's Trace, or the old Yellow Mountain Road. Table Mountain is what we now call Table Rock. You can see that really good if you're coming up from Morganton on 18 or 181, or if you're on the Blue Ridge Parkway, where I'm sure everybody was there this past week. He continues his narration. It's November 1752. They've pitched camp, and he has rode over the land that they're looking at. He says, quote, that they had found all we thought was required for a settlement, very rich, fertile bottoms, the likes of which we had not seen nowhere yet in Carolina, and some of which could be cultivated many years before it could be impoverished. They lie at the foot of a very rich hill from which the rain would wash down the rich soil and keep them always fertile. There's also a good deal of land that lies somewhere higher, or somewhat higher, which is well adapted to the culture of wheat and Indian corn. There are many springs and streams and even creeks, the water of which is clear and sweet as anyone could possibly wish. Further down is the river. Higher up, there are two branches which unite and form the rivers, the waters of which are as clear as crystal. Bottoms and uplands are well stocked with wood. For stock, this is an excellent country, as the reeds are still quite green. This is fortunate, as our horses would otherwise perish. There are many places which could be converted into good meadows, and many more could be made, because the water from the streams could be so conducted as to irrigate the land with but little labor. The soil along the hills is as a rich clay. In the bottom it is black soil. For the erection of mills there is an abundance of water and falls. Stones are plentiful, and we believe suitable for grindstones. He writes again from the same camp on November 24th, talking about the land and the beautiful game, bountiful game. In his previous entry, Spangenberg talks of the Cherokee and how they had been hunting in the area. He observes buffalo trails, and he writes that the trails, quote, whose tracks and paths may yet be ascertained and found to be useful. Frequently, however, their tracks cannot be followed, for they go through thick and thin, and through the deepest morasses and rivers, and often they are so steep that a man may roll down or fall down, but he can neither ride nor go down them. I wish he would have said that he actually saw buffalo, and not just their trail. That would have been a fantastic 3 or 4 words he could have added right there, but they're not in there. He also describes, quote, the wolves, which are not like those in Germany, Poland, or Livland, because they fear men and don't easily come near. The wolves give us such music of 6 different cornets, the likes of which I have never heard in my life. We don't think about wolves anymore, do we? Or buffalo, or panthers. Old-timers in my neck of the woods would call them painters. That's history that's out of our touch, because they've all been gone for 200 years. The group had changed camps when the bishop rode again on November 28th. This time, they were in an old Indian field on a northwest branch of Middle Little River. So we don't have one Little River here. We've got upper, middle, lower, etc. I wonder if he is referring to what we now call Warrior Fork that flows into the Catawba River. That old Indian field may have been the site of Juara, a Native American village, visited by Spanish explorers, both De Soto and Juan Pardo, 200 years before Spangenberg and his party passed through. He wrote, quote, the Indians have certainly lived here, perhaps before the war with the white settlers in North Carolina. They are the remains of an Indian fort. Grass still grows on the site of the dwelling, and the trees show also that men have lived here, but it may be 50 or more years ago. That site is really just an assumption on my part. There are numerous old Indian fields. If you don't believe me, go read land grants. But I wonder. It was the Spanish who had built a fort in Burke County, what's now Burke County. It was called Fort San Juan. It's 1568. This was one of just a series of forts built by the Spanish in the western and Piedmont areas of present-day North Carolina. Fort San Juan, from Fort San Juan, the Spanish spread out, venturing over the mountains and maybe as far north as Saltville, Virginia. A few months later, after the Spanish arrived and built Fort San Juan, the natives at Juara razed the fort and killed all but one of the soldiers. But I wonder, is that where he was at? If you don't know, Fort San Juan right now is being excavated. It was discovered several years ago. You can go visit the site. They have open houses, and I would encourage you to go do that and see some of the things that they have found there. A day later, November 29th, Spangenberg filled part of his entry that day with praise to the Almighty, thanking God for their safe journey so far. From their spot in what I presume present-day Burke County, they planned to go to the headwaters of the Yadkin, a large river, but on account of its terrible falls and numerous rocks, useless for commerce. Writing in 1922, the editor of Volume 1 of the Records of the Moravians of North Carolina believed that the group was near Edgemont, North Carolina. Edgemont today is pretty much wilderness. It lies in the Pisgah National Forest. The railroad came to Edgemont, which is now in Caldwell County, in 1906. There was a lumber camp nearby, yet a series of fires, 2 floods, and a lack of jobs pushed the community back into the wilderness. This is a picture I took several years ago of Greg Pond near Edgemont. From here, probably in the Edgemont area, Spangenberg and his party pushed north. On December 5th, he wrote, quote, "We have reached here after a hard journey over very high, terrible mountains and cliffs." Once again, they were camped in an Indian field, which Spangenberg thought was a branch of the Yadkin River, or maybe, as later interpreted, the south branch of the New River, which bubbles out of the ground near Blowing Rock, heading in a northerly direction. He continues, quote, "A hunter whom we had taken to show us the way and who once knew the path to the Yadkin missed the trail and led us into a place from where there was no way out except by climbing on hands and knees and dragging us the loads we had taken from the backs of the horses. For had we not unsaddled them, they would have fallen backwards down the mountain. Part of the way we led the horses, who were trembling with the report that he had seen a meadow. So we cut our way through the brushes to it, reaching it by evening to the delight of the men and the horses. Some believe that this meadow that he just talked about was the location of the town of Boone. If that is true, then I believe the group came up to the west of Blowing Rock and not up John's River. Why? Well, there's really not a well-defined creek so full of rocks in between Boone and Blowing Rock. You have to go further west. He may have come up one of the gorges carved by Phillips Creek or Curtis Creek or Racket Creek. The good spring that he mentioned, that doesn't really help us either. Yes, it could be the South Fork of the New River, which bubbles out of the ground near Blowing Rock. It could be White Springs Branch or Boone Fork or Dixon Creek or Bellew Creek. There are many springs in that general area. But there's no big creek, river, like he described between Boone and Blowing Rock. You have to be further west to encounter the Watauga. And some folks may say, if you've ever been to Valley Crucis, and I'm sure all of y'all were there last weekend, the Watauga River is wide and there aren't that many rocks. Well, the Watauga River is dammed. And that backflow takes out a lot of those rocks. You can't see them because they are under the water. Just my thought. So they're camped in this meadow when they are hit by a snowstorm. It's December. He could have come up in October like today, and it wasn't a snowstorm, but I'm sure he would have written about that wind and the 33 degrees and the snow flowing around. They're camped in this meadow. They're hit by a winter storm. The ground is covered with snow, the water freezing beside of the fire. Spangenberg looks over the ground, believing it to be 5,000 acres. He writes, much of it already clear, long grass grows here, and it is all lowland, even though it's at an elevation of 3,400 feet. 3 creeks unite in a river that flows into the Ohio, and with the Ohio into the Mississippi. How did he know that? How did he know that you have three forks of the south of the New River and that they flow north into the Mississippi or into the Ohio and then into the Mississippi? How did he know that? I wish he would have said somebody told me that, but he didn't say that. There are no canes, he writes, no sign of them, but plenty of grassland. Of wood there is no lack. We have included it in our tract, a beautiful chestnut forest and fine white pine. The water is clear and delicious. Many hundreds or thousands of wild apple trees grow here. And then he writes, from here we can see Meadow Mountains. Meadow Mountains. I took this picture on Saturday from east of Boone, looking north. If you're in Boone proper, you really can't see much. You can see Howard's Knob, you can see Rich Mountain, but Rich Mountain is a very long ridge that stretches back toward the Tennessee line. So he's got to be east of Boone proper. Spangenberg estimates that the Meadow Mountains were about 20 miles away and that the Virginia line was only 15 miles away. Well, if you are just east of Boone, the Virginia state line is 26 miles. Spangenberg was probably seeing Mount Jefferson and or the Three Peaks in Ashe County, present-day Ashe County. Mount Jefferson is 17 miles from Boone. And as I said, I took this picture Saturday looking north. Possibly the same vista that Spangenberg had in 1752. They do not stay long on top of the mountain. I guess that winter storm and your water freezing beside of the fire was enough. By December 14th, the party had quit the high country. They were headed down the mountain, eventually running into the Yadkin River, probably the Lewis Fork of the Yadkin River. They estimated they were 120 miles from the home of Morgan Bryant. Bryant is buried in present-day Davie County. They had seen some good land that might be acceptable, but did not stop to survey it. They were, quote, in a hurry to reach once more the home of some settler, not having seen anyone for a couple of months. December 20th found them in present-day Wilkes County at Mulberry Fields, surveying additional land. There's actually a county park at Mulberry Fields right now. You can go check that out. By January 8th, 1753, they were encamped at the Three Forks of the Muddy River, which is about where we are now. We're going to leave the expedition with these final words from Spangenberg. He writes in his journal, toward the end of the year, we came into this neighborhood and found a body of land which is probably the best left in North Carolina. If we had had a true account of this in the beginning, perhaps we would not have gone to the Catawba, nor beyond the Blue Mountains to the New River. But doubtless the Lord ordained that in ignorance of this we should take up those other thousands of acres, which will in some way serve his purpose. The land on which we are now encamped seems to have been reserved by the Lord for the brethren. The Moravian lands in North Carolina total almost 100,000 acres. So what can we take away from Bishop Spangenberg's trek literally across our state, from Edenton to what he calls the Blue Mountains? Quite a bit, actually. Even though North Carolina had been settled for 100 years, it was largely barren and sparsely populated during Spangenberg's visit. Spangenberg frequently mentions the lack of towns and communities as he and his companions traversed the state. Spangenberg writes of Native Americans he encounters, giving us a glimpse into their lives. The Tuscarora, whom Spangenberg wrote, were few in number and lived in great poverty, told Spangenberg to tell the Catawba that they had plenty of young men who knew their way to the Catawba towns. Important little piece there. Spangenberg told of coming in contact with native hunters, yet when he reached the tops of the mountains, he makes no mention of native villages or encounters. We were in the throes of a mini ice age, and while natives frequently hunted beyond the crest of the Blue Ridge, they left the high country during the winter months. For those of us who live and research and write about Native Americans and about the high country, that's an important little detail. It's not just Spangenberg who doesn't mention it. Daniel Boone doesn't either. No villages, no towns. Finally, Spangenberg gives us many glimpses of the area pre-European settlement. A stream full of rocks, a meadow where the long grass grows, the water is clear, wild apple trees. In some ways, this sounds like paradise. Unless you were there today, and it was 33 degrees and spitting snow. Bishop Spangenberg left us with the first description that a few of us would get to, of a place that a few of us would get to call home, and that many of you come and visit on a regular basis. He's the first. And I am grateful for his journal and all of the folks so many years ago who have preserved it and transcribed it for all of us to use. Thank y'all very much.
The Archie K. Davis Award has been presented every year since 1999 to honor the memory of a man long dedicated to the history of the Moravian communities here and the state of North Carolina. The award recognizes the contributions to history, the growth of knowledge, and the sharing of it in ways that spark interest locally, regionally, nationally, and globally. The award has been given to two people at a time, once before, to Travis and Eva Haynes just last year. This year, the award is given to two very deserving individuals who are not married to each other, but whose collaborative work has broadened the knowledge and understanding of the history and culture of Wachovia in ways we are still beginning to grasp. These two extremely knowledgeable persons have been working together full-time towards a mission of breathtaking breadth and importance for nearly 8 years. That 8 years, however, represents only the tip of the iceberg when viewed in the light of the extensive involvement both of these people have had in this area of work, and this area especially as it relates to Moravian history and culture. Not only have they brought countless previously unknown facts to light in their painstaking, never say can't find it research, working with scholars and with those who are, in my mind, technological wizards around the world, they have pushed the edges of technological capabilities as well as historical and musical knowledge. Some years ago, I read an excellent book on organizational management and leadership. In Good to Great, author Jim Collins counsels organizations regarding whether to take on a new project. There's really only one question. Is this project key to the mission of the organization? If not, then limit the resources you expend. Save the best of all your resources for things that are key to the organization. If, on the other hand, the proposed undertaking is a key factor in the fulfillment of the organization's mission, then, he says, have at it. Throw everything you have at it and become the best in the world. Sound difficult? Sound impossible? Not for these two. Beginning way back in the early 1990s when even email was new on the horizon and the World Wide Web sounded like science fiction. These two, as members of the Board of Trustees, were urging the Moravian Music Foundation to get out in front of these technological communication frontiers. For each of them, working as board members, their passion for the Moravian musical heritage and their passion for their own lines of work merged into something I can only call a force of nature. They took hold of the ideas, came up with plans and processes, and captured a vision for the board and staff of the Moravian Music Foundation that has brought the foundation to where it is today, at the forefront of music librarianship and archival musical bibliography. It's going to be difficult to say much more without revealing names, and some of you have a pretty good idea of who I'm talking about. Let me stretch this out just a little bit longer. One of these persons has been involved with Moravian music research and bibliography at least since the selection of a master's thesis topic in the 1970s, a thesis which remains a key resource for studying musical repertoire and performances in American Moravian communities. Over more than 20 years, she worked with the Foundation's staff and Board of Trustees to clarify policies and procedures for the Foundation's research library and archival holdings, and to prepare for the great work she has been directing ever since her, are you ready for this, retirement 8 years ago. The other person has also been in the trenches of Moravian music bibliography, having done an internship with the Foundation for his library science degree, and since then, while working full-time elsewhere out of state, undertaking some very impressive and useful research and bibliographical projects, not to mention composing and editing music himself. He too has been deep in the details of this work at the Music Foundation since, here we go again, his own retirement 8 years ago. There is nothing like bringing in extremely qualified, extremely experienced, and overwhelmingly passionate individuals when you want to tackle something that's almost unimaginable in scope and indescribable in results. Both of these persons, in addition to the detailed detective work they do every day, have made presentations at regional, national, and international music and library science conferences, truly spreading the word about Moravian history, music, and culture far beyond the borders of Wachovia, far beyond the borders of North America. Their international contacts have enticed numerous online visitors and a number of in-person visits from musicians and scholars literally around the globe. It would give me a great deal of pleasure personally to continue bragging about this project to the Moravian Music Foundation, which was named Gemeincat, the catalog of the Gemein, the community. This is the most recent, but far from the final, of the Foundation's big, hairy, audacious goals. This project has put Moravian music and history in the forefront of musicological and historical research, not to mention onto countless concert stages and digital audio recordings. To bring this presentation to a conclusion, though, I would be very remiss not to pay tribute to the unshakable integrity, faithfulness, and all-round human goodness of the character of each of these individuals. I've known them both personally and professionally for many years now, and I am so proud to call them dear friends and to present the Archie Davis Award to my sister, Barbara Strauss, and to my brother, David Bloom. Dave is in Germany at this moment, continuing to enhance our international relationships following the Unity Archivist Conference held last week in Herrnhut. Barbara will receive the award for both of them. Barbara? I particularly appreciate the pizza box, which just happens to be the perfect size for the presentation. And I will take yours out, Barbara, and let you see it. And Dave's is quite similar. It is a handmade plate. Wachovia Historical Society Archie Davis Award, Barbara Strauss, 2022. So, thank you so much. You may speak if you want to, but you don't have to. Okay.
Thank you for this wonderful honor. This is a project that has come full circle for me. And if you come to the Guild meeting in January, I'm going to talk more about it. Follow the music.
Thank you, Barbara.